Our story, well, this is the preliminary, so our story really begins on February 2nd, 1630. While preparing this conference, and hearing these dates, because the information I had was not giving all the dates. Now I found a book on him, and it was interesting. February 2nd, 1630. So let's situate ourselves. Champlain and all the French lost Quebec in 1629. The British came, the English came and took Quebec City and took everybody. Jean de Saint-Jean-de-Brébeuf and a few others, brought them back to France. So 1630, Quebec, Canada, it has been taken over by England. In 1629, actually. 1630, it is in the hands of England. But France will defeat England in a battle, and one of the spoils will be to give back New France to the French. So in 32, the English will give back Nouvelle France to the French. But we are in 1630. So at that moment, so Nouvelle France is in the hands of England. But 1630, on February 2nd, some of you may have heard, I know some of you do know about Our Lady of Good Success. Our Lady of Buen Suceso, we say. Which is going on at that moment in Ecuador, in Quito. Because the famous vision of Our Lady of Buen Suceso is 1634 on February 2nd. February 2nd is a feast of Our Lady of Buen Suceso, but it's also very much connected with the foundation of Ville-Marie. So on February 2nd, 1630, Feast of the Purification, and remember he belonged to the Congregation of the Purification, one of his sodalities. He's been to Mass with his family, and he's been to Mass, communion, and after Mass, after communion, so he's praying in his thanksgiving. It's in the statue of Our Lady du Chef du Pont, that's a French name, in an ancient chapel of a castle. And while he's doing his thanksgiving, he hears this voice. He has this inspiration. It's a mystical voice that he hears, asking him, here it is, okay, asking him something rather strange for a married man with 5 children. So having received communion and having consecrated himself to the Holy Family, he had already devotion to Saint Joseph and the Holy Family, which was not so common in these days. It was the beginning of these it always existed, but the spreading of this devotion was just beginning. While he was praying, he felt filled with an extraordinary fervor, and as taken in ecstasy, it seemed to him that God was commanding him to work for the establishment of the congregation of the daughters, the hospitaller daughters, hospitalier, daughters of Saint Joseph of La Flèche. And that voice, God was dictating to him the first chapter of the rule of these nuns. So he's telling him, you're going to found a congregation of nuns who will be called after Saint Joseph, who will take care of a hospital, and here's the first page of the book. That will be their constitution. So, a married man asked to found a religious congregation. Remember, we had, with Marie de l'Incarnation, we had a cloistered nun asked to found a school in Quebec, or somewhere in a foreign land, but she's cloistered. So, he, being a good spiritual man, he had a spiritual director, Father Chauveau, a Jesuit. And Father says, it doesn't make any sense. You're married, you have a family. It's not your duty to found a religious congregation. So just forget about it. Leave it to God, but ignore that. So he obeys. But that was February 2nd, 1630. Now, the book I have here, which is one of his biographies, says the following year, 1631. Other books say it could be 1632 or one of the following years, 33, 34. According to some of the early sources, it was on February 2nd that this time he hears not to neglect the order that he has received earlier on to establish a congregation of hospitaliers, but to establish a Hôtel Dieu. It's the name of it's a hospital that will be run by the sisters in Montreal in New France. So the first locution was start a religious congregation, and about a year later, or it could be 2 years, but later, now he's told, what are you doing about what I told you earlier? And I want these nuns to go to Canada as well. All right. His spiritual director says, go for a walk and take a good steak, stop fasting, do some penance, and stop doing penance, so. 1632, he gets very sick, almost dies, but all of a sudden he's cured. And so life goes on. He has a family to maintain, and he works for his family. And his spiritual director says, it's crazy. What you've been told is crazy, so just ignore it. Parallel to this, in 1634, now this young lady called Marie de la Fère, on February 2nd also, she hears the call of a vocation to become a nun. She has a vision of a hospital ward with lots of beds, and the voice says, you're going to be working there. And she doesn't know what it is, but anyway, the call of a vocation to become a hospital nun. We come to 1635, so Jerome de Dauversiere goes to Paris on a trip to try to make some contacts, as he's, I would say, not bothered, but he's this mission that he has been given is pressing him. So he wants to go and meet some priests and talk about it in Paris. And this time he goes to Notre Dame, the cathedral of Paris, the magnificent Notre Dame Cathedral in the center of Paris, where he is going to pray and receive new graces. So here it is, the great year. Having arrived in Paris, he felt obliged, before dealing with any business, to start with his ordinary devotions. So he went to Notre Dame to pay her his respect to this sweet mother and to ask her protection, asking her to bless all his undertakings. After communion, he remained a long time in thanksgiving, intimately united to God. Being alone at the feet of our Blessed Lady, as out of himself, so in ecstasy, he distinctly saw Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And he heard our Lord asking his mother, "Where will I find a faithful servant, where will I find a faithful servant? Where will I find a faithful servant? Our Lord said 3 times. And Our Lady said, here, my Lord, this faithful servant. And she took Mr. de la Dauversiere by the hand and presented him to her son. And at the same time, our Lord received him with kindness and said, you will therefore be my faithful servant. I will invest you with strength and wisdom. You will have as guide your guardian angel. Work strongly to my work. My grace will be sufficient for you. I will never fail you. Receive this ring and give a similar one to all the nuns that will consecrate themselves in the congregation you are about to establish. A ring that the sisters wear. Okay, so that is at Notre Dame, at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. So it's a reminder of what he has heard already. He's going to go and meet different priests. One of the priests is going to be a Father Bernier, a Jesuit priest, a place called Meudon. It's a French city. And as he arrives in the building, the place where the Father Bernier lives, again here there are different versions of the story. One is that the 2 men arrive in one corridor, one by both ends. Another, they were in the vestibule, in the sitting room, whatever. But as he got there in the house, he met another priest, and they seemed to recognize each other, having never seen each other. And this other priest was Monsieur Ollier. Monsieur Ollier is the founder of Saint-Sulpice. It's a religious congregation, a bit like the Society of St. Pius X, for the training of priests. And Monsieur Ollier also had some inspiration about doing something in Canada. And they talk about this project of doing something in Canada. So that was the first contact of these two. While he's in Paris, I think it's while he was in Paris, or could be after the trip, but Monsieur de la Dauversiere joined la Compagnie du Saint-Sacrement, the Blessed Sacrament Confraternity, which was a very interesting organization. We're talking here about 1630s. We are in the 1630s. There's a lot of Huguenots in France. There's Catholic Protestant problems. There's some fights. And this little society it's a bit of a secret society. It was founded originally to assist the priests who are going to give communion to the sick people. Nowadays, we bring communion, we're alone in a car, take the Blessed Sacrament, and go to the hospital, fine. In the old days, or if it's very, very close by, or if it's a big house, the priest will have an altar boy ringing the bell, an altar boy holding the candle, and they'll be walking on the street. He would be walking with 2, 3 altar boys, bringing communion to a neighboring village, a sick man. But it happened that thank you very much. Merci. It happened that some Protestants who were against this whole worship of the Holy Eucharist would come and beat the priest up and steal the Holy Eucharist to profanate it. So the good Catholic men in France, we're talking about the Counter-Reformation. So there was the whole spirit of counter-Reformation, to protect the faith, and so to help the church in line with the teaching of the Council of Trent, which was to stop the Protestant Reformation. So these men had organized themselves in this confraternity of the Blessed Sacrament to protect the priest. So when they knew that the priest was bringing communion, they would go and follow the priest, a bit like bodyguards, to help the priest and fight if necessary, and to defend the Blessed Sacrament. Jerome de la Dauversiere was part of this confraternity of the Blessed Sacrament. And they were great people in this confrérie, Compagnie du Saint-Sacrement. Saint Vincent de Paul was in it. Monsieur Aurier was in it. If you remember, Henri de Lévis, Duc de Ventadour, do you remember him? He's the one, back in 1625, who said we're going to only send Catholics to New France, and also we'll send the Jesuits. And Saint Jean de Brébeuf was sent because of him. Monseigneur de Laval, François de Laval, the first bishop of Quebec, was part of this confraternity. Bossuet was part of this compagnie. The founder of the MEP, les Missions étrangères de Paris, the missionaries in Asia, they were also, Monsieur François de Palu was also a member of this company. So it became very famous. They provided more than 20 bishops. When you see the list of the known members, there are over 20 bishops who came out of this confraternity. And this will have an importance for the financial support of Montreal. Because Monsieur de la Dauversiere, being a member of this, so he meets these eminent people, and some of them are of the nobility, some of them are rich, and they will have an interest in the foundation in Canada. So that will be an important thing. In 1636, we're moving on, Jerome de la Dauversiere found the Confraternity of the Holy Family and establishes the seat of this confraternity in a little chapel in La Flèche, where he was living, where there was a hospital. Now, he was a tax collector. He was not managing the hospital, and he was, he was taking care of his family. But he was a well-respected man in La Flèche. La Flèche is not a big place. Although it had this big school, I told you, le collège, the Jesuit college. I forgot to tell you, or I think I'm not sure I told you, there were 1,600 students in that college, and they had 100 Jesuits in the college. 100 Jesuits. Imagine 100 society priests in St. Mary's, Kansas. It'd be amazing. Amazing. But and that's why they had so many vocations as well. So, but in La Flèche, there was this hospital which was in great disrepair, and they had problem managing the hospital, and they were looking for somebody to take over the management of the hospital. And the city authorities thought there's nobody as reliable as Monsieur de la Dauversiere. So they asked this tax collector to become the manager of the hospital. And so he gathered together some ladies to help out. They're just young ladies. They're not nuns. But then he was asked by the city authorities to look for a religious congregation to take over the hospital. And he asked a few. Nobody wanted to come, perhaps because it was too much in financial problems. And finally, but he had this group of ladies, who were volunteering their work to work in a hospital. Finally, I jump a little bit. In 1639, they found one religious congregation of Dieppe in the north of France. It was something like, they said, yes, we'll come. We'll send a team. And within a day just before or a week before, whatever, something happened and they said, no, we're not coming. And it was when in La Flèche they heard that the nuns were not coming from Dieppe that the authorities of the city told Monsieur de la Dauversiere, well then, why don't you turn your young ladies into nuns? And there it was. So all these young ladies wanted to stay there, take care of this hospital, and wanted to become nuns. And he founded, thus, his Sisters of St. Joseph by divine providence. So it took a while, 1630, now 1639, but it happened. He, as a married man, founded a religious congregation. Meanwhile, in the course of all of this, he had met, I need to speak about him too, at least mention him. He had met a young man who had lodged in his house in La Flèche. His name is Pierre Chevrier, Baron de Fancamp, the Baron of Fancamp, you'd say, who was a nobleman who, from a very rich family, and he will strike a great friendship with de la Dauversiere, and he will actually finance him deeply in all his projects because he was so impressed by his faith and by his spiritual life. So the sisters were approved finally in December 1639. The sisters being approved, now there's what about Montreal? The second prophecy about Montreal. So Montreal, at that time, belonged to La Compagnie des 100 Associés, this company of the 100 associates. And one of them, Monsieur de Lauzon, owned Montreal. Jean de Lauzon. We have our school in Lévis. The little village was called Lauzon. So he was one of the 100 Associés. And I go briefly over this, but Jean de Lauzon was rather avaricious, and they had some plans about the island of Montreal, which the company of the 100 Associates had plans. Nothing materialized. And it looked very bad, actually, because not only de la Dauversiere was supposed to found a city on an island, but the island was owned by somebody who was not interested. Okay? But Providence arranged it that in August 1640, probably through the various contacts in Paris, in France, and especially in Paris, the Jesuits who had been to New France, who had come back, some of the eminent people, Henri de Ventadour, as we saw, and St. Vincent de Paul, and some great personalities. But Jean de Lauzon donated the island of Montreal to the two men, le Baron de Fancamp and de la Dauversiere. The gift, the deed of donation, was disputed by the other members of the associate, but finally it was settled on December 17, 1640. So de la Dauversiere, this young tax collector living in a small town in the middle of France, and his friend, the Baron, became the owners of the island in Montreal. Rather strange, buy an island in China. Well, maybe there's some gold mines on the island, I don't know. So, and this deed, the deed of the contract of December said that the pioneers must be there in following spring, 1641. Okay, so now they own the island. Now he has nuns. Now he has a man who has some money. Le Baron has some money. So let's get organized. And so he started speaking to those that he knew about creating this society, which will become the Society of Montreal, the Society of Our Lady of Montreal, Notre-Dame de Montréal. And in it, you will find also Monsieur Ollier, another Baron de Renty, another rich man in France. You needed these people to support financially, just like Lazarus in the Gospel, Joseph and Joseph of Arimathea. There's always God sends some people with funds to help build these projects. Monsieur Ollier was St. Vincent de Paul was there, or he was very close. So de la Dauversiere is now, he's starting to put all the pieces together. I got the island, we have some funds. Now we need to get the people to go there and start it. And I need a leader in this expedition. He didn't have anybody. So he was asking the Jesuits, and praying to find somebody. And lo and behold, so Paul de Chaumédé de Maisonneuve comes in the story. Paul Chaumédé de Maisonneuve. So we call it Maisonneuve. He was a young military, about 30 years old. So in 41, he's 30 years old. He had wanted to join a crusade against the Turks, against the Muslim. But circumstances were not favorable for this. So he found out through the Jesuit relations, the famous Relation des Jésuites. Remember, Marie de l'Incarnation heard about that, heard about Canada through that as well. And this was the missionary magazine or book. It was one number every year, only once a year. The Jesuit would send their stories from Nouvelle-France, the difficulties, the problem with the Iroquois. Now we had the foundation of Marie de l'Incarnation in Quebec. We don't have yet martyrs, but this was the bestseller in France in the late 1630s. All the nobility, all the great Catholic families, all the organizations were reading the stories of the Jesuit in the New France. It was just fantastic. And Maisonneuve had come across one of these stories as well, one of these relations. And he says, well, if I cannot go to the Middle East, I'll go to New France and fight for Christ the King. So he goes to Paris and to talk to some of the priests. I think it was Father Lallemand. Here it is. Okay. Father Lallemand, who they were influential people in the high society. So you have Maisonneuve who goes to Lallemand, who says, I would like to go to New France and do something over there. But remember, in New France at that time, there's only Quebec. It's 39. There's St. Mary of the Huron in Midlands. that's way out in the bush. Okay? So it's only Quebec, really. There's a few hundred people in Quebec. So Father Lallemand, who also knows de la Dauversiere, he's looking for a guy to lead an expedition. So Father Lallemand says, I think I know somebody who might help you. Anyway, and that night, Maisonneuve goes and stays in a local inn. And later on, de la Dauversiere shows up. And he shows up to meet the priest. And the priest tells him, I think I have your man. Oh, yeah? Yeah, he's in the hotel over there. Okay, and you describe him, a young man, 30, a military, he's a go-getter. He really wants to do something for our Lord. So he's right there in the hotel. Go and see if, just pretend you just bump into him, you know. So de la Dauversiere goes to the hotel and orders something to eat, you know, and it's 1,600 hotels, you know, have the cafeteria, the dining room, and he's looking and he finds this young man in a corner over there. He says, has to be him, you know. And he goes and, I don't know, they talk. People are very social. They see somebody alone, you go and talk with him, and how are you, where are you from, whatever, start talking. And then little by little, the discussion comes into Nouvelle-France and the relation of the Jesuits. And de la Dauversiere tells him, listen, I'm starting to put together an expedition. And he tells him his project. And I'm looking for somebody. I'm your man, you know. And whoa, so that's how they met. That's how they met. Thanks to the Jesuit who knew, because they were influential people. So we are in the early 1641. Remember, the contract said that they had to send pioneers in the spring of 41. Okay, so things are being put together.